So I'm in the St Ives Museum with Matilda Webb, author, Andy Smith, curator of this fabulous museum, and Peter Davis, art critic. Now Matilda, I've just got this book of you and I can't wait to read it. So can you just hold it up?
I can.
And tell us a bit about it.
So this is the product of 8 years. It's definitely been a labour of love. When I was growing up, I lived here and my family were artists. So there was always a lot of talk about the artists of St Ives and Alfred Wallis. And then in 2017, I went to Kettle's Yard and was blown away by the collection of his paintings. So I thought, well, I've known about him all my life, but I don't really know about the man himself. So I decided to find out more and found pretty much the same information being repeated about his life and not a lot of detail. So my background is archaeology, museums and research. So I went to, well, the first thing I got, the key to it all was the the marriage certificate of his parents, and that began to unlock quite a lot of information. It had his mother's address in Penzance in Coinage Hall Street, and through that I was able to trace her in the census and then her family and trace them back to the Isles of Scilly and her ancestors, one of whom was a Scottish soldier who was
Susan Ward?
No, that was Jane Ellis was her.
Okay.
So that's Alfred's mother.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Jane Ellis. So she was from the Isles of Scilly, and so I was able to then discover more about her family, Alfred's maternal family. And then the same marriage certificate said that at the time they married, his parents married in 1845, his father Charles was a sailor. So I went to the National Archives in London and I looked through lots and lots of old crew lists from that year of Penzance registered vessels, which is where they were. And I found his name on a ship called the Stag, and then I found the names of Alfred's maternal uncles on other Penzance registered ships. So the pieces started very, very slowly to fit together, and I thought, well, I'm pretty sure there's a lot more to find. And also with the benefit of the internet and genealogy sites and then online newspapers and all that sort of thing, really, I spent the last 8 years researching, hunting, doing detective work, fitting pieces together, and this is the result.
That's brilliant. I mean, so I'm fascinated by all that genealogical work, and I suppose a lot of the other books have been written mainly about, I mean, not that he was part of the St Ives scene as an artist, but about his work and the usual narratives that they
Yes.
He painted what he remembered, and what he remembered went back a long way to the days of schooners. As a young man, he had rounded the Cape under sail. In his middle age, he had been to Labrador on one of the first steamships.
What I do mostly is what used to be out of my own memory, what we may never see again, as things are altered altogether. There's nothing whatever to not look like what was since I can remember. If I live to the 8th August next, I'll be 78 years old. I was born in Devonport.
With this 8 years of research, I have really tried to let no stone be unturned. And I did find a small bit of evidence in a notebook that Sven Berlin kept, which said basically Alfred Wallis was, and Berlin hyphenates discovered. He said Alfred Wallis was first discovered by Christopher Wood and later Ben Nicholson.
Yeah.
So that's the one piece of evidence I've found which suggests that when Wood was here in 1926 and was kicking around with Cedric Morris and Cordelia Dobson, that he heard about Wallace. I mean, he was staying in St Ives in 1926, that he saw Wallace's work. I mean, Wallace used to put his paintings outside on the window ledge and outside his door. So you know,
he wrote about it. He talked about Wallace being a bit like Van Gogh, being the sort of local Van Gogh painter, and you know about his lovely colour, Christopher Wood. I think it's some letter he wrote. I can't tell you which letter, but you must be aware of that. He actually wrote.
He wrote quite a bit in 1928 to his mother about visiting.
It might have been that.
Wallace.
Yeah. Mary Jules, by the way. Yeah. Mary Jules is the sister. She was a naive painter, well known now, but Nicholson used to be friendly with them. He used to motorbike over to see her during the war. So Nicholson was interested in the naive before meeting Wallace.
Definitely, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I just wanted to read this quote from my book, which is something that Nicholson wrote. One had to get right back to the beginning and discover what painting really is, and then learn to walk step by step. Wallace was part of that process. Brackets, we were looking for him. End of brackets. Yeah. Before finding him, I had found another primitive, a house painter near Castagnola. So they were definitely, you know, looking for, at that time, self-taught artisan artists were a la mode, and obviously starting mainly in France, but by that time there were others in this country, and Nicholson wrote to Helen Sutherland about Wallace shortly after meeting him in 1928, and she wrote back and said, the ground seems to be teeming with primitive artists. So it was definitely, it was, you know, exactly, and they were looking for him. And if not, so some people, yes, strongly believe that they knew of his existence, but also I found evidence, including Alfred's own words, that he pinned up some of his pictures in August to his door, because that was the first year that the St Ives
Open Studios, wasn't it, at that time?
No, the Open Studios was carrying on, but the St Ives, the School of Art, opened up, and that was August 1928, was their very first inaugural summer exhibition in Porthmeor Studios. So I also think that partly Nicholson and Wood were on their way to go and see this new, great new latest thing.
That's it.
Passing
just a few
Wallace's
yards from his cottage,
where Wallace had pinned up these. You know, he says, I pinned up these pictures to my door, and in walked two gentlemen. So it's all very, you know, I think it's really important to just see it, well, from Alfred Wallis's point of view.
Alfred Wallis was one of the many fishermen who lived here in Back Road West, together with his wife, Susan. This was the doorway in which he would stand of an evening. When he retired, he became a rag and bone man like this one. One day, the painter, Ben Nicholson, saw through his open door a room full of pictures. His wife had died when Wallace was 67, and after her death, the old man had started to paint, to keep himself company, as he said. He had painted all over the place on anything he could lay his hands on. He couldn't afford canvas. He painted on the walls, on his fire bellows, on the tops of cardboard boxes, on old exercise books, on bits of board, both sides.
Alfred Wallis has kind of stumbled into this scene without any influence at all on him by any artist, which is what I find completely fascinating. He's a complete ingenue, really. I mean, is this why he's so significant?
I think so. I mean, I think, you know, the originality of his work and the directness of his work. He wasn't influenced by other schools of painting, and during his whole output in the late 1920s and 1930s, he was painting for himself, really. He was painting for pleasure, painting the things he loved in the way he loved doing it, and he wasn't influenced by the avant-garde, the different streams of modernism in those periods. So, and I think that's part of the reason why his work is still so popular today, because it's fresh for each new generation. It doesn't look outdated, outmoded. It didn't follow a mode that would then pass by and be dismissed.
And he used to paint with not even traditional paints, which just like house paint and enamel boat paint and bits of cardboard. That's what I find completely fascinating, is that he was running this business with his donkey and cart. Because I come from a family of rag and bone men, so I grew up with that kind of scene. Yeah. And it's really interesting that I think he said that he painted when his wife died as something to do because he was lonely.
Well, again, this is one of those things that is often repeated, but isn't actually necessarily the case.
Great.
Susan died in 1922, and Wallace didn't start painting until 1925. And in fact, August this year is going to be, for me, certainly very exciting. It's the centenary of Alfred Wallis starting to paint. Okay. Which I think is amazing, and I've tried to get other people interested in this, but
what would you like to do?
I don't know. I just think there should be some wider recognition. I've contacted the BBC, I've contacted St Ives, and I've contacted a gallery in Penzance. I'm trying to generate a bit of interest, but nobody seems to be that interested at the moment. The one that shocked me the most was the myth, I see it as a myth, of the artists, the sort of Carbis Bay artists, Stokes and Nicholson and Mellis and Hepworth and Gabo, providing Wallace with this wonderful purchased grave in Barnew's cemetery. The reality was that, according to, so it's quite well known that Wallace gave his neighbour Martha Peters £20 to use for his burial, his funeral, and her grandson was living with her at the time, Eddie Mert, and he later became quite a well-known local historian. And he wrote to the Times and Echo in the 90s to say that he knows that when Wallace died, his mother took the tin with the money to the undertakers, the Burrells in Dygy Square, to organise his funeral. So there's further evidence from the amazing oral recordings made by Roger Slack that basically Alfred Wallis was having a family funeral shortly after his death. His sole surviving stepchild, Jacob, was walking behind the coffin. His various great-grandchildren were there as well. And then Adrian Stokes and the other artists came from Carbis Bay, and they interrupted the funeral. They stopped this funeral, they took Alfred's body home, and it's generally believed put him in his coffin, put the coffin in the garage of Little Park Owls.
Blimey, that's interesting.
Stokes went back to St Ives a couple of days later to organise a second funeral, which he did. All the wreaths from the artists that are often quoted, they were all written by Sven Berlin, who met Stokes. This is from this notebook that I was able to see, written by Sven Berlin at the time. Stokes asked him, he said, look, I can't deal with this, you write all the wreaths, and I'll pay for them. And so They had the second funeral, a very small affair. They didn't give the family much notice. There were a couple of family members there who were said to understand very little of what was going on and not to care very much, which is quite shocking. And then they buried him in the grave that they'd purchased, which cost just over £4. Wallace had his £20 funeral money saved for a long time. If he'd wanted a private grave, he could easily have afforded to buy one in advance, but he didn't, because he wanted to be buried in the nonconformist section, near his nearest and dearest, nonconformist as a Salvation Army person. He was buried in an Anglican grave in the conformist part of the cemetery. But having buried him in this purchased grave, the artists went on their way. A year and a half later, Bernard Leach suggested perhaps we should actually mark the grave, and he was the one who made the beautiful tiles and the absolutely stunning grave that's still visited a lot today. And that was constructed 3 years later. So essentially for 3 years, Wallace lay in an unmarked grave.
In Barnoon Cemetery?
In Barnoon Cemetery.
Okay. And the tiles were done by Leach later?
Bernard Leach, So to me, that's quite that whole story has been mythologized into a very...
This is bizarre, because the official narrative that I've grown up with was that he was a pauper. His paintings were thrown in the street. Nicholson and Wood came and paid for him to be buried there. What do you think their motive was?
The motive.
The motive of the artist.
Of Stokes.
Yes.
Stopping the funeral and. Possibly guilt that Wallace had died in the workhouse. I don't know.
Because a lot of those artists did seem to get quite a lot of Wallace's suddenly into their collection, didn't they? We don't want to get you into trouble, we kind of know who they are.
I think what I've done with the book is I've used as many contemporary documents as I can from all of these protagonists to let the facts speak for themselves. I've tried to be as fair and as straightforward as I can be, just present the facts to allow readers to make up their own minds.
Yeah. The other thing about Wallace is that there's no real evidence that he was broke, because he seemed to be a successful businessman.
Exactly. It's a difficult, it's a bit of a knotty situation. He was a very successful businessman. There is a lot of family stories about one of his stepsons taking his money, and it came about also that he discovered after his wife's death that she had been bailing out this stepson's business with money from their joint post office savings account, which is why I believe Wallace turned against his wife after her death and refused to go upstairs. I think there is quite a bit of evidence to suggest that he did have all this money disappeared.
Yeah.
And he was a poor man. He had his 10 shillings a week pension. And basically there's this dichotomy where people say, well, he used house paint and old boat paint because he couldn't afford anything else, and he used bits of cardboard because he couldn't afford anything else. And then also this view that he was a victim, well, not so much a victim, but he was painting altruistically, and people were coming along and buying his paintings for very little, which they were. But actually, when you read all his letters to Nicholson and Ede, it's quite clear that he started as a hobby,
Yeah.
But once he'd sold some paintings to Nicholson and Wood in 1928 and Winifred Nicholson, he clearly does start to think, oh, yeah, I could make a business out of this.
So he was actually selling paintings
he
at
was,
the end of his life.
Yes, he
Yeah.
was. I mean, even after being discovered not discovered, I really don't like the use of that word. After he met Nicholson and Wood in 1928, there's a shift. He starts to, Nicholson writes to him and says, could you send me some more paintings? And then there's a shift when Wallace starts to write to Nicholson and say, right, I'm sending you a batch of paintings. So he's not waiting for requests. He starts sending them, and he sends them to Ede as well. And in fact, he sends them to a couple of other art collectors as well. So he's
that goes against the narrative of him being a kind of shy victim, really.
Oh
doesn't
yeah,
it?
exactly. I don't think he was. I think he was, an able businessman. He enjoyed his painting. He enjoyed sharing his paintings. He wanted people to enjoy them, and he saw that he could make a bit of money. There's a letter from Wallace to Jim Ede saying, or it might be Nicholson, it's all in the book, saying, I hope you have a fine summer of business. You have little ones to bring along, and I will take money. And I've never seen that quoted anywhere.
Yeah.
But to me, that is Wallace working as any artist would, for the love of it, but needing to create an income. I mean, he needed an income to buy the paints, particularly because he wasn't. It's some people say, oh, he was scrabbling around in the dustbins and getting old tins of paint, but he really insisted on using a brand, Peacock and Buckens, which he used to get from the Burrells store in the Daiji, and from another stores in Chai and Chai. So he was deliberately using.
So this was a deliberate technique that he developed.
He was deliberately using this Peacock and Buckens boat paint, and he tells there's a woman that Jim Ede asked to come and look after him, just to make sure he was okay and fed and everything in 1929. And he said to her, and she wrote back to Jim Ede, I only use peacocks, but up to now, people thought that was a shock. They didn't realise he was relating to. He was talking about the brand of paint he used.
Well, the devil's in the detail, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Which is why it's taken me 8 years.
Well, I get that. Yeah.
So his paint was a deliberate choice. I also believe that his use of scraps of cardboard was deliberate. He had.
Well, in the same way that Schwitters was using found objects, so just a stroke of genius, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And he had various children and people around the town. It wasn't just Mr. Bourne the grocer who was giving him cardboard. He had shoe boxes brought to him by Mary Cumley and etc., and he used different types of cardboard.
Yeah.
And I think also his incredible seas that are just strokes upon stroke upon stroke of this heavy paint.
Yeah.
He needed a strong support like cardboard.
Yeah.
So I think it was deliberate choice.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. The other thing, Jim Ede was a very significant player in this game, wasn't he? Because I think the first time many of us saw rooms of Wallace's was in the Kettle's Yard in Cambridge, and which makes a great visual impact, and clearly a very shrewd man who's connected to the Tate, wasn't he? He was an American businessman.
And we used to go in there, my mother used to cook for the old man. And when we used to leave the plates out there and the little basins with his dinner, he used to draw on them and paint. It's on the little basins, you say, with the gravy and things in them.
We used to live in back roads just by where Aaron's Court is now.
Little tiny man with blue eyes. I don't suppose he's more than 5 foot tall.
Very often when you went in, he was painting on something. Sometimes he would let you watch him a bit.
From a social history point of view, when I was doing my Zennor film, I was going to interview Dave Kerr, and the Kerr family. I think the Kerr family owned the cottage that Alfred Wallis lived in, and when he died, they let him stay there free on the basis that he then it would pass to the Kerrs. And when I was chatting to Dave Kerr in the street, who must be in his 80s now, he used to be the landlord at the Tinner, so I was interviewing him about that really. But he said that he was probably the only person alive to actually still have physical contact with Wallace, because his father used to take him to sit on Wallace's knee. So I never got to do that interview, but I thought it was really an interesting little bit of social, gossip really.
Yeah, definitely. I've been really lucky to meet Den Ward, who is Alfred Wallis's great-grandson. He's just turned 90, and he remembers going to see Wallace when he was 5, and Wallace gave him some paintings, and also a model boat, which I've seen.
Oh, is that the one that Jake Nicholson?
No, it's different. It's a different one.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that Wallace made any of the model boats that he's given to different people, like Jake Nicholson. I think he was getting them from Andrew Armour's antique shop. But the one that Den Ward has...
Well, if he was doing house clearances, maybe he got them that way.
Yes, I think so.
Because he was taking stuff over to Penzance, wasn't he?
He was, to Joseph Denley's.
Yeah, Denley's interesting. He was a very eccentric character, wasn't he?
He was.
He was very miserable, just like a
well,
tramp.
Again, that's a myth.
Is that another myth?
No, it's another myth. He's poor old Denley's been much maligned. I had the pleasure of meeting his great-grandson recently.
Yeah.
And he came to the book launch. At the book launch, it was fantastic because there were descendants of Wallace's wife, the Wards. There were also descendants of Wallace's brother, the Wallis family.
Right.
And they came and they met for the first time together.
God, that's fascinating.
It was great.
I wish I'd been to that.
But yes, well, I didn't know you then, I'm afraid.
That, yeah.
It would have, well, there is a video of it.
Is there?
There is, done by Tony Mason.
Because clearly they're a very tough family, to be enduring such hardship and also living to ripe old ages.
Absolutely.
Did that come through when you were chatting to them?
Yes, it did. But what also came through, and I found very humbling, is their gratitude that I've finally telling the true stories and questioning the myths, and also including their part in Wallace's story, because I think my one criticism of some previous work on Wallace is that people chose to portray him as an isolated, cantankerous, difficult man, but his family looked after him right up until he went to the workhouse. Wallace had a really close relationship with his great grandson Willie Farrell and his great nephew Bill Wallace, and they were young men before they went to war, and they would come and see him every week, and had were very, very fond of him. So I've had the good fortune to meet Andy Blair, who is Bill Wallace's grandson, and he's given me access to material, an interview he did with his grandfather. And they were really overlooked, I think, by some of the previous writers on Wallace. And so, yes, at the launch there were the Wards and the Wallaces, and also the Denley descendant. And what was fascinating for me was the Denleys, Ian Denley and Andy Blair meeting and talking about how they were both, their ancestors had been badly portrayed. And Andy Blair was able to say to Ian Denley that he remembers in his family that the Denleys were always really well thought of. And it was said that they looked after Alfred Wallis and Susan and the family.
Well, there's a rumour, which is probably a myth again, that Denley, when he died, left £500,000.
Definitely not.
That's
all in the
millions,
book. Yeah, no, it was not. Nothing like that.
Yeah. But you get these stories, especially around Cornwall. So,
as I say, this is why it's taken 8 years. Because
well,
there have been a lot of stories
clearly,
that I've
absolutely
had to tackle.
Meticulous research. And can we just hold the book up again, Matilda? And I'm going to go home and read this for sure.
when he left to go to Madron, he left everything in the cottage, including the fleas. Now, Adrian Stokes, who had quite befriended Wallace beforehand, went down and cleared out the paintings. And he took them away, and some of them were taken by Willie Kerr. Willie had been Wallace's next door neighbour and had bought the house from Wallace quite a long time before for £35, I think it was, which was about the going rate for cottages at that time. And he had bought it from Alfred on the conditions that Alfred could live there as long as he was alive, or as long as he wanted to. So Willie had some paintings, and then the decontaminators came down and cleaned up the cottage, and Willie Kerr then let it out as a holiday let.
I'm back in the St Ives Museum with Matilda Webb, and she's going to show us some of personal effects of Alfred Wallis, including this harmonium. So what's the story on this, Matilda?
So, amazingly, as well as painting and making and selling his own ice cream and all the other things that Alfred Wallis did, he also taught himself to play the harmonium. And he did so to accompany his wife, Susan, playing hymns for when she was doing her cottage meetings for the Salvation Army. So she joined the Salvation Army quite early on when they moved to St Ives, around sort of 1884, and Alfred Wallis joined in 1904, but he played her favourite hymns. There's one of her favourite hymns, Ring the Bells of Heaven, and that was definitely a favourite of theirs. And she would sing, and apparently she felt that Alfred didn't really have a great singing voice,
Right.
so she would tell him to go up to the Salvation Army and sing there, and she would sing at home. But
He was deeply religious, a chapel goer. The fish in this picture were, he said, the souls of the ship. When he was very old, in his 80s, his paintings became full of foreboding. What he feared more than anything was the workhouse and a pauper's grave.
this is a facsimile of Alfred Wallis's entry into the Salvation Army. That the Articles of War are actually really quite strict rules and regulations that anyone becoming a soldier of the Salvation Army had to read and understand and then sign as a sort of contract, really. So that's got his signature and the date down at the bottom.
Yeah, he signed that Alfred Wallis, didn't he?
Yes. And next to it is a photograph taken in 1905 at a big Salvation Army sort of summer picnic. And Alfred is in his bowler hat, the last person seated in the front row on the right.
That one?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So, and what I love about this photograph is that it shows, you know, he had friends, he was a sociable man, he had the camaraderie of his fellow Salvation Army soldiers.
Yeah.
It wasn't until much, much later in life that he became more solitary and you know, lived quite an isolated life.
Yeah.
He did still have members of his family visiting, but it just shows I think quite a lot of people have this vision of him always being cantankerous and lonely and isolated, and it definitely wasn't the case.
No.
Yeah, he had friends and family here.
There was never anything came out that made one feel that there was something deeply psychological about him until in his very latter days, when he obviously became senile and behaved in a very peculiar way, which upset the neighbours. He used to shout about the devils upstairs in the middle of the night, waking all the neighbours, and he used to curse the portrait of his wife that he painted himself. And I mean, I've only heard this, I didn't witness it myself, but so these sorts of stories about him were so common that they must have been true.
Part of the writing process that I've enjoyed the most is going into storerooms and looking at old documents and just being able to, like a detective, find nuggets of information. So this is a store in St Ives Museum. And get the light on. So in here, these are all the St Ives poor rate books from the early 20th century, and they are an absolute mine of information on who lived where. So I've sat and gone through all of these, and the one that I was certainly the most excited about is this one from April 1911. So it records everybody living in St Ives, how much their place cost in terms of rent, and how much they were going to be rated to pay the poor rate tax. So this is the page in question. This page shows that on the 15th of March 1911, Alfred Wallis took over the house at 3 Back Road West, the cottage that he and Susan lived in, from Richard Humphreys. So this gives us a firm date for when they retired from the marine stores business. And in fact, so this was the cottage that Alfred had bought in 1908. But looking at the previous rate books, it shows that Richard Humphreys and his family were in 3 Back Road West whilst Alfred and Susan were still at the wharf. So they bought the house and then they were renting it out to the Humphreys family. Another sort of indication of Wallace's business sense, really.
Some good old names here like Cocking and Quick.
Absolutely.
Good local names.
Yes, that's something I've really enjoyed.
So what was it like when you first discovered this? Was it kind of a road to Damascus experience?
Oh, it was one of them, yes. Yeah, along the way in different archives, I've come across little sort of golden nuggets of information that, are really, really, really pleasing.
Great.
You'd hear somebody say, everything in Mr. Wallace's is nothing but books. He's painting up everything. He did too.
You used to have a piece of paint on the table, on the walls.
Even on the tablecloth. With ordinary paint. He only done it to pass away the time, because he didn't want no worldly goods because he had his pension. You see, in his little house of his own out there. I used to wonder if the artists going in there so much, they would go in and they were carrying wood, for them to paint on pictures. We used to say, well, what does they see in that picture? But of course, we've known since that he was the cleverest artist around.
Just an example of how thorough your research is, that you not only traced Alfred Wallis, but also all of his children.
Yes, so these books have, as I said, they've got information on everybody in St Ives. So I've used all of them to trace Alfred and Susan's moves. They've moved between 4 different properties in St Ives, and also all their stepchildren and their in-laws, other family relations. Wallace, Alfred's nephew William Wallace, who came to St Ives in the 1920s, and his son Bill, who then was one of the young men that Alfred was very close to in the 30s. These I've sat many hours with these rate books, just seeing who's moving where and who owns what, just building up a picture of the social history of old families of St Ives, which has been fascinating.
That really is detective work, isn't it?
It is.
Bordering on obsession, if I can say that, Matilda.
No, you can't.
I can't say that.
No. Thorough.
Meticulous. Thorough is the word. Yes. I mean, 8 years is a long time to be researching somebody.
It is.
And I guess you get to feel as though you know them almost inside out, really.
I definitely do feel that I've gotten to know not just Alfred Wallis, but other members of his family.
Yeah.
And I've lived through his highs and lows, writing all the chapters about his adventures at sea, the storms he survived, and just really getting an understanding of how terrifying it would have been to be mid-Atlantic in a storm. The ship is semi-capsizing. You have to be lashed to the deck and hand throwing the cargo into the sea to right the ship. I mean, writing these things, researching these things has really helped me understand much more about who he is, how his thought processes, the tragedies he lived through, and everything he overcame. So what I really, really hope for the book is that it will be very enjoyable and very informative, but at the end of it, people will look at Alfred's paintings in a new light, not just seeing them as charming, but as really reliving deeply felt experiences.
I mean, as a writer, do you think you'll ever do anything like this again with another?
No.
It was a one-off.
It was a one-off.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's been really challenging. I mean, 8 years is a long time. Obviously, I've been fitting in life in around that, so it's not been a daily thing. But yes, it's been very challenging, and I've done everything myself. I've set up my imprint company, Diff Press. I've done the designing, obviously the research, the writing, and now I'm the marketing and promotions person and salesperson, which is all a steep learning curve for me. So yes, I think this is the one.
Great. Well, thanks, Matilda.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.